U issa se niltaqgħu ma' Sur Mario Cacciattolo illi ex-ġurnalista tal-BBC, però spjegajlkom qabel illi wkoll qed jagħmel biċċa xogħol partikolari li tolqot l-immaġinazzjoni ta' ħafna nies. Hello, Mr. Cacciattolo, thank you very much for joining us.
Hello.
We're going to use the English language, right? Your Maltese is still a little bit rusty?
Skużani, nista' nitkellem bil-Malti, imma konverzazzjonali biss jiena.
All right, mżax, ma wasalt mhux ħażin tajjeb.
Grazzi, grazzi.
Naħduha bil-kalma, tibżax.
Grazzi.
Għax toħloq effett ukoll meta nitkellmu fuq is-suġġett tiegħek. Però nibdew pass pass. Inti kont u fejn teħel tkellem l-Ingliż taħbir rasek xejn. Inti kont ġurnalist, ex-ġurnalist tal-BBC, u xejn?
Yes, I spent 10 years at the BBC, yes.
Any particular line of journalism, or was it?
So what I did was I was an online journalist for the BBC.
Right.
So I worked for the BBC News website, but I also did time in radio and TV. I also managed to come to Malta 3 times on assignment for the BBC.
Okay.
Because I'm half Maltese, I grew up here. Unfortunately, my Maltese is only conversational. But yeah, I kept coming across good stories here in Malta, which had an international appeal. So I ended up coming to Malta on assignment for the BBC, reporting. And I would then come on holiday as well. So,
so you're familiar with the island?
In the end, I moved back here because I just thought, well, I keep coming here, whether it's for work, whether it's for pleasure, and I'm always reading up on Maltese history. So I ended up moving back.
Wow, okay, that's a big step.
Yes.
But there's something, okay, so you're now doing the job as a tourist guide, am I right?
That's right. So I gave up the BBC to move back to Malta. That was a big sacrifice.
For sure.
And then when I was here, I continued to research Maltese history, which I've always done, and that's just been for pleasure.
Right.
But, as you say, I've just become a tourist guide. I went through the qualification, and I wanted to be able to tell people, using my journalism skills, I wanted to gather historical information of a particular nature.
Right.
I wanted to gather information about Maltese history and take people on walking tours, as I say, using the experience I'd gathered at the BBC to entertain and educate people. So that's what I do now.
Okay, and you have now seemed to be focused a little bit more on paranormal, am I right? So
I would class it as a dark history, which is quite a broad term.
Yeah.
So some people hear about dark tourism, dark history walks, that sort of thing. So yes, paranormal is one aspect of it, and I do tell a couple of ghost stories, because there are a couple of good ones here in Malta, but I'm really interested in the real stories that have taken place in Malta, in that stories where people, I'm afraid, have been horrible to each other, have done terrible things to each other in the past. I am talking about very old stories from centuries ago. And from the time of the Knights, for example, or a couple of 100 years ago, that sort of thing. When you look into that sort of history, well, you don't really need the paranormal to frighten people.
True enough. It's macabre enough. So
Exactly.
But it's maybe because we're not living in those times, thankfully, at least not in most civilizations, but it has a bit of an appeal, no? There's almost I wouldn't say a voyeuristic approach, but we want to know more. What did they used to do? What kind of torture did they use, or what kind of methods were used in the past? There's almost a curiosity in many of us, including these, let's say, ghost stories. We've had some, we have another journalist here at Malta who actually did her work with the Times of Malta. And she is, as a journalist, she had started to compile a list of first-hand experiences of things which are not easy to explain. So, and I suppose you're met with lots of disbelief. No? Many people would say there's one story in particular, a few stories in particular, are very difficult to actually believe.
Well, yes, that's true, which is why, actually, I mean, that's all very good points you've made there, and really that's why I only tell certain ghost stories, ones in which there's quite some evidence of something strange at the very least going on. And I'll give you one example. There's one very well-known story of a ghost that's supposed to haunt a building in Valletta. And this is the ghost of Oliver Starkey, who was the right-hand man of de Valette at the height of the Great Siege. And there's a building in Merchant Street that he's supposed to have haunted. And I tell that story, but I discovered that the story is about a family that was living there at the time, and that's how we know about it. But I discovered that one member of that family still lives in Malta. And I tracked them down and took them for a coffee and got them to tell me what went on. And they gave me extra information, which I've never come across in any book or any online source about this story. So that's the angle I try and take, a little bit more forensic examination. So yes, it's a ghost story and there's some nice touches to it and it's quite an interesting tale, but when I do my walking tours, I always say, and, ladies and gentlemen, I can give you exclusive information, and I give them that little bit extra.
Right.
So I try to be quite, as I say, journalistic, forensic. I try to examine what went on. And if it's paranormal stories, then I try to choose the ones where there's some evidence of something strange at the very least. And then the rest of my stories are about real cases that were written in history, court cases, stories that we just have a lot of good written evidence for, and they can be quite terrible as well. I
see. In fact, there was one about gender alignment, no? So which dates back to 1700s, I believe.
That's right, yes. So I came across some research that had been done. So we've got some fantastic researchers here in Malta. So I'm very lucky. As a tourist guide, I'm using lots of books and lots of resources written by some first-class academics that we have here in Malta. And they've dug out, at some point in their lives, they've dug out some fantastic stories, which I now collate and I curate and I talk about. So, for example, there was a case, now this was written about in 1954, but it dates to 1774, and that is the first recorded incident of somebody changing their gender. Now, this is obviously a topic we hear a lot about today. It's often in the news. But in 1774, there was a 17-year-old woman called Rosaria Mafsout. She worked in a shop in Valletta, but her father was from Lucca. But she wanted to change her gender. She wanted to live as a man.
Impressive.
And she wasn't able to at first because in the 1700s, you couldn't disguise your identity. This was because the Knights of St. John was worried about spies.
I see, of course.
So you couldn't pretend to be a man if you were a woman or vice versa, just because they thought, wow, you might be a spy for the Ottomans. Of course. But she, Rosaria, goes to the Grand Master and she says, I really don't think I'm a woman, I think I'm a man, and I want to change the way I live. And in a really enlightened move, the Grand Master ordered a medical examination for her, and the doctors agreed that she was more masculine than feminine.
That's impressive.
And that they allowed her to change her gender. And this, as I say, is the first record we have of somebody being transgender in Malta.
1794. That's
1774.
1774.
Even earlier.
My gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, it is astounding because I would never have imagined that something like that would have happened in those times. But why Malta? I mean, you lived in the UK, right? I mean, the UK...
So, no, I used to live in the UK.
No, you used to there. So I'm sure there are ample stories of the macabre or the darkness. And what attracted you in our own history here? What was it so particular?
Well, like I say, I'm half Maltese. My father was from Msida. I grew up in Malta, and I left unwillingly, as in my father passed away and we ended up going to live in the UK. But none of us wanted to go, really. We'd love to have stayed here. So I always wanted to come back to Malta. I wanted to reconnect with the country in the modern sense. But for me, I connect with places wherever I go through history. So I'm a dark tourist. I've been to the killing fields in Cambodia. I've been to New Orleans in America, and I've been on vampire walks and ghost walks and things like this. So I really get in touch with a place personally through its history. Now, there is no better place to do that than Malta. There is incredible history here. It's very intense because Malta's so small. So an awful lot of history has happened in a very small place. Yeah. Also, as I mentioned before, there's been some fantastic work done by local academics to dig this history out. When I do my walking tours, I'm always delighted that most of my customers are Maltese. So the Maltese are really interested in their own history, which
I mean, this is really intriguing because, as you say, especially when we talk, you mentioned Merchant Street in Valletta, yes? I mean, most of us are walking up and down that street any time of the week. I mean, it's so to know, to think that we're so close to a story which is definitely intriguing, definitely captures our attention. Now, whether one believes or not, that's completely immaterial at this point, but this is it. We'll walk through our history every day of our lives, so without really knowing what happened and what used to happen there. Is there anything that you learn from your interest in these darker episodes of history about the nature about human nature? Is there anything which sheds a light on, okay, this is who people really are, or was it a particular period, or are there some dark corners in our lives which maybe aren't always expressed?
Yes, there is. Something that's really struck me in my research that I've gathered is the treatment of women in society, especially in the past. So I kept coming across many instances of women being tried for witchcraft in the Inquisitor's Palace in Birgu. Right. Some men as well, so they were known as sorcerers, but if a woman was casting magic, she would be called a witch. Now, just to clarify, if a woman was found guilty of witchcraft, there wasn't anything horrible like burning at the stake like you see in the movies. There wasn't that here in Malta. The women in particular, because a lot of these magic cases were women, they would be told to go back to the Catholic Church. They'd be told to go and pray a lot, go to church a lot, confess a lot,
redemption,
all that sort of thing. Yes, exactly. Seek redemption, exactly. But I started looking into, well, hang on, there's an awful lot of women being accused of an awful lot of magic, and it's usually love magic, okay? The whole point of it is to get a man to fall in love with you. Now, this keeps coming up. There's a huge amount of these spells across several centuries. So, when I started digging into it, I sort of partly read and I partly realised of my own volition that the reason this was happening is that these women actually needed protection. Because we're talking 17th century, 16th century even. Now, society is very, very different to today, and unfortunately, women back then were subjected to all sorts of difficulties.
More vulnerable, maybe.
Exactly, more physically vulnerable, unable to work. A lot of them would marry a sailor who would push off to sea for 5 years or something, and the woman wouldn't know where he was. Sometimes the man would marry somebody else in another port, and the woman would be left at home, looked down on in society because she was a woman by herself, didn't have any means of supporting herself. So a lot of women turned to love magic to get a protector, not because they just wanted somebody to, cuddle at night, but they actually needed protection. They needed somebody to put a roof over their heads, need someone to pay for them to eat, need someone to physically protect them against potential physical assault. So the more I've looked into this and these spells, the more I see a trend that reflects on society and how it treated women in the past.
And sometimes even in the present. Mario, thank you very, very much. This was really, really interesting. I look forward to one of your tours, actually, because it would be really interesting to discover and have a different outlook on our own little island. Thank you very much for coming, for accepting our invitation. I look forward to hearing more about your discoveries of Malta. Maybe in Maltese next time, right?
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Mario. Waqfa għasina, nkunu ma'